If you're going to be a global business, it is only to your benefit to be able to interact with employees and outsourcing on a global basis. And it's not just about the money, which is a very important one. When I think about outsourcing, or particularly IT outsourcing, the economics of things across the globe allow for any number of opportunities, like advantages for a business to be able to lean into. A disadvantage is that people that you work with on an IT outsourcing basis are usually not focused on only you.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Devico Breakfast Bar. Here we speak with different people involved in the business landscape, share their expertise, delve into the latest tech trends, and explore the ins and outs of IT outsourcing. I'm Oleg Sadikov, and today I'm excited to have Eli Goodman, CEO and co-founder at Datos, a SEMrush company. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. Hi Eli, and thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, nice to see you, Oleg. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to our chat.
Let's start our podcast with a little blitz. I start the sentence and you continue. Entrepreneurship gave me...
Entrepreneurship gave me heartburn.
Entrepreneurship deprived me
Of sleep.
My main superpower is...
Speaking.
My main weakness is...
Delegating.
When I'm afraid I...
Do my best to relax.
Sounds great. What motivated you to start Datos, and what was the specific problem or gap in the market that you wanted to address?
Yeah, well, I mean, listen, I could talk about that for the next hour if we need to, but it's a couple of things. One, you got to remember the timing, right? The idea of Datos really came together in mid-2020, and I think we all remember what was going on in the world at that time with COVID and lockdown, and nobody really had any idea about where things were going to go. And I, at that time, was between gigs. My last company had ended and wasn't sure what I was going to do next. And I met my co-founders, Serge and Stan, and we ended up putting together the idea of Datos really in order, and I think you're hitting on it, to be able to serve like a particular part of the market that I, for a long time, believe has been underserved. So just to be clear, we are in the data as a service marketplace. And in particular, our specialty has been clickstream for the past few years, and we certainly will expand into different data sets. But clickstream in particular, which is the URL sequencing of what people are doing on mobile and web and desktop browsers. In the end, most companies that build off of clickstream, they're insights businesses. That means that they sell results, right? They take clickstream, mix and match it with other types of data sets, other things that they add to the mix, and then people log into SaaS products and whatnot and go from there. So going back to what we felt was underserved, it might not be the sexiest way of looking at things, but to me, especially for companies that build any type of product or insight, perpetual and stable data supply that you could trust is of the utmost importance. And that has been something I know, having been in data, tech and data, for the past 25 years, finding data supply that you could trust can be very difficult, it can be very expensive, it can be very hard to maintain. So although it might not be the most scalable business, like Datos, and Datos now is a SEMrush company, I don't envision us being multi-billion dollars in revenue anytime immediately, like I'm sure many of my AI company friends are up to. But it is something that is acquired and I felt is underserved.
How did you manage to find your first clients and gain trust in the market?
Every founder or every company is going to have a different answer to this, right? And for us, my experience, I've always been a salesman, right? Like I have always been on the revenue generation side of things. And when it comes to how to be able to build up, let's call it like the ability to create something from nothing, that classic 0 to 1, but in this instance, business, right? Like when it comes to revenue, really it's because you build, and for me, it's about having built that network of people and understanding, if you will, over the course of the past, as I had said, 25 years since I graduated from university. So when it came to how to find the first people, it's because I knew who to call, right? Like I knew exactly what it is that we had on offer, and I had a very clear understanding of product market fit. It was not, I was coming at it from a sales perspective and not necessarily from a product or marketing perspective, which could be different ways to be able to think of a tech startup. And for us, it was about what do we have on the truck and who buys it. right? And so when it came to that, it was really being able to reach directly out, not only in my network, but call it lookalike modeling almost to my network of knowing exactly who the consumers of our type of data or our type of product were, and then having a very clear stated value proposition to be like, listen, this is what we do. I know what you do. You need to take a look at this, right? That's the first thing, just like knocking on doors. And at that time, it was like LinkedIn and email, right? That was really it. Since, again, it was COVID, so it's not like you could even go see anybody. So that was really where it began. And then from there, and this is a very important thing about any type of data as a service, or DaaS, we'll call it for short here, is the data almost speaks for itself in the sense that it works or it doesn't. It's somewhat binary, right? Obviously, the use cases are different depending upon the company, but going back to how you source the first clients is that the discussion is not so much me selling them on it. It's agreeing and understanding, like that, call it big S system, if you will, about how and why big data decisions are made, and being able to speak that language. But really, in the end, it's like, this is the data, but you have to tell me if it works or it doesn't for your purposes. There are any number of things that we do did and still continue to do in order to make that as easy as possible to be able to get to that result. But I think that's where it wasn't so much salesmanship as much as having a very clear understanding about what it is that we had and who the buyers are. So the ability to like make the market, if you will, was much easier than sitting down and like, we built a great product, but now we have no idea who buys it, or we don't have product market fit, or whatever it may be.
Are there any key lessons that you learned that you wish you knew when you started your entrepreneurial journey?
I mean, there's about 1 million of them, right? But like, if I were to highlight
I'm
the
sure
big
you
one,
can share all of them. If we had 12 hours, then
baptism by fire, I guess, right? Like you jump into the deep end of the pool and figure it out for survival. There are a couple things, right? I would say one of the ones that maybe, I don't know if anybody realizes this, founding a company, one of the most important things, and actually where you spend almost all of your time over the course of the first few years, is talking about legal and finance, like / accounting, right? The sheer amount of discussion that you need to have with lawyers and financial planning and analysis teams and accountants and VC firms, private equity, investors, whomever, I cannot overstate like how important that is to the founding and running of a company. And I say that it's not just about like keeping the lights on, but it's really, in the end, if you have like a long-term plan in order to scale the business beyond just like, call it a lifestyle business, right? People have lifestyle, like millions upon millions of people have lifestyle businesses around the world where it's a small business and it maintains and everybody gets paid and you're a private company and that's fine. But if you have scaling ambitions, right, beyond 5 people, 10 people, like you're really going to continue to go, you really should do your best to set up the company in a way that matches up with bigger companies and investors in the future. And I say that, think of things like in the United States, founding a C Corp instead of an LLC, or working on having GAAP accounting principles as opposed to non-GAAP accounting principles, because later on, when you have to merge these things together, it could be much more difficult, right? So that's one, right, is understanding and figuring out along the way about legal and finance and how incredibly important that is as foundational elements to found a company. The other thing that I'll mention here, and this is, no matter how much you could read it in a book or somebody could talk to you about it, it isn't until you're sitting in the seat to be able to really understand this one. And I'll give credit to Paul Graham. I had read an article or a column that he had put out sometime in the past. It's a good way to put it. It's about founder mode versus manager mode. And founder mode, and this is what I'm getting at, is in a book and the way that things are sort of presented to you in whether it be college or you're getting an MBA or something like that. Hire smart people, delegate responsibility, and they'll just figure it all out. Simple enough, right? That's manager mode. And founder mode really is realizing that there are very particular and unique things that you are bringing to the table as the person that not only decided to found the business, but has the vision. In order to scale, you do need to delegate, right? You do need to hire smart people. You do need to give them room to operate, but you should not completely remove yourself from the ongoing day-to-day operations of not only your direct reports, but the company as a whole, right? And I think that that was something that a founder is naturally going to fall into that because you just have no time, right? Like you're trying to just do everything, right, from top to bottom. And I think that's sustainable to a certain point. But if the business starts to scale as art did, it is going to boil over, and you cannot be in every meeting. You cannot make every decision. It just isn't possible, nor is it appropriate, right? Like that's not a good way to scale a business. But figuring out what your own personal homeostasis, if you will, is with the universe around you and under you as far as your business is concerned and where you should be involved. That was probably one of the most difficult things that I and my other founders, that we have had to figure out. How to navigate that in a way that you're not, quote, micromanaging, but you're not also just like setting it and forgetting it, if you will, right? There is like this balance that needs to be struck, and it's going to be different for every person, every founder, every startup. So those are my big two that I would highlight this morning.
You mentioned about company founding concepts in terms of legal, accounting. Can you share a little bit more information? Starting from the example you mentioned, C Corp versus LLC and accounting types. I think it would be interesting for my auditory.
Fair enough. I will speak of these things in United States principles, which is where we are based. We are based here in the United States, and certainly like laws and regulations and whatnot will differ company or country by country and region by region. But these are actually important things that you might not know out of the gate, right? And here in the United States, there are any number of different ways that you could found a company, if you will. And an LLC is like a limited liability corporation versus a C Corp, which is effectively like a corporation, as anybody would think of it. And I reference this about a C Corp versus an LLC. They have very different like tax structures in the United States as far as like when you have profits, how those are considered. Do you claim those profits on what's called a cash or an accrual basis? Like all of these very complicated accounting things. But what I'm also referencing here is a C Corp is really the way that basically any big company in the United States is going to be set up. Almost all of them, like when you just think of a corporation. And there are any number of protections that are afforded to founders under a C Corp, but you pay higher taxes. So to be clear, it is important, but there are also, if you are going to take on investors, right, as in you're going to raise money, or you have a cap table, if you will, the capitalization table, and you have the way the shares of the business are set up, anybody that's going to join that journey with you as an investor in any capacity, they effectively are going to be like, we need to reorganize this into a C Corp, right? Because there are any number of like, again, rules, regulations, limitations, advantages, like the way that that's set up with like the share structure that are incredibly important. And here in the United States, it's also something that you don't think about when you start, but the United States is very friendly towards people that found companies, right? Like from a pure tax basis perspective, the United States wants you to be an entrepreneur. It's good, right? Go found companies, go create things, build. So what happens is that if you found a C Corp and that business meets any number of criteria, after 5 years being a founder of a C Corp, if you sell your business eventually or a portion of that business, up to, depending upon how you structure it, up to the first 10 to even upwards of $50 million that you would gain for selling those shares are tax-free, right? And that's an incredibly important thing to a founder, right? As opposed to the United States, that could basically, you could give half of that to the government under normal circumstances. So tax-free on $20 million, that is a ridiculous amount of money. So there are also like personal things that you don't think about, right, that you might not know about. It's called QSBS tax treatment, and I let anybody could just go ahead and Google that themselves here in the United States. So that's one thing, right, that I would say an example of like an LLC versus a C Corp, understanding, and one's not necessarily better than the other, but you as an individual need to think about what serves you best, right? Like that's an important factor. And you need advice on how to get that done, which is actually will like bring me into the next thing when you talk what is called GAAP accounting. And again, I am not a CPA, so I will limit myself here. But GAAP is an acronym which I believe stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles, right? GAAP. And in essence, it's like a formal way that corporations, at least in the United States, and I'm sure this applies in other places around the globe, that everybody agrees, like as in they are generally accepted accounting principles on how to be able to define like revenue at a company, how you recognize revenue, is it cash versus versus accrual? How do you book contracts? Are they subscriptions? Are they projects? It's basically, again, I'm just going to call it like the way the adults do accounting, right? I don't have a better way to be able to put it. That is also very important, right? Public companies in the United States, every single one is going to be, you'll see them. Just look at when they announce earnings, like this is our GAAP accounting, blah, 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 like fill in the blank. So again, it goes back to if you really are founding a business under the idea that it's going to scale, my high recommendation is from the beginning, hire knowledgeable, like not to be employees necessarily, but start with and say, talk to lawyers, talk to an accounting firm and say, what are my options as far as like how we set up this business, how we're going to recognize revenue, what are like, the legal principles that should be in our master service agreements and whatnot, because it's not just about growth, it's also about protection. Right? So setting it up in a way to be able to maximize, think about all of the investment that any of us make. Like, there are certain things in the world you should ask for excellent expert advice. Do you just like self-medicate or do you go to a doctor that like went to school and had a residency and does all these things? Like, this is too important. Right? If you are going to found a business, go spend the money, right? And talk to people that really understand and can lay out what are the options so that you could determine what is best short-term and long-term.
What strategies did you employ to grow from a startup to a global data provider?
I will actually piggyback on the question that we just had, or that I just had answered that we had addressed, which is starting with like legal and finance, right? Which is laying the foundation with which that if we are going to be able to grow from just like a little company, right? When it was just the three of us on our couches, like two of them in Germany and me here in New York City, to eventually grow to where we're like, 40 some odd people now and have been acquired by SEMrush and growing. You have to start with figuring what is a scalable architecture related to your business. So again, I mentioned legal and accounting, but that also then you have to sit back and start to play out or game out like that future chess game, if you will, is what does this look like? Low, medium, high success rate. How many people are we actually going to need? What type of AWS investment are we going to require in order to handle our DaaS services, processing and storage and things like that? What you want to do is be as proactive versus reactive as possible, because nothing is worse than reacting to like a huge bill that you had no idea was coming, or regulatory change of some kind that you're like, oh man, I had no idea that was going to happen, and then bang, that is something that you have to deal with. I imagine years ago in Europe with GDPR and so on and so forth. That's just one example. You need to be able to be prepared for any and all instances, and that foundation, if you set foundational elements in your business that is, again, an architecture that you could build and massage and sort of move things around in a modular capacity, if you will, that is going to be incredibly important for your ability to go from startup to, in our business, we call ourselves a global data provider, but you really got to think about even little things like, what does employment law look like in different countries around the world, right? If you're going to pay somebody $1 in the United States, how many more dollars are you going to have to pay in order to have payroll taxes and life insurance and all these things that you offer as benefits? That's very different country by country, like what a dollar that you pay somebody in Europe, depending upon the country, or in Asia or whatever. They all are very different. So that's what I'm saying, is you have to think, what languages does everybody speak, right? Like, I know we want to talk about how you find IT outsourcing talent. Like, there are any number of things we're going to go to here. The further into the future that you could think as it relates to like where are we going, and I'll use, this is not just an American term, but a sports term in general, right? Which is this is a hockey term, shoot the puck where they're skating to, not where they are right now, right? And that, I think, is also a very simple idea, is that you need to figure out where to direct your efforts towards where you're going, not just where you're sitting today.
As both founder and CEO, what does your typical day look like, and how do you balance strategic planning and day-to-day operations?
This also, again, I could talk through how I do it, right? And everybody is very different, because I will say this, I am a big believer that different people are productive in different ways at different times of the day. Right? So that's the first one, that flexibility is incredibly important in my day, right? So what happens is that, because I'm here in New York, but a bunch of my team is in Europe, I am up early, right? Like, not only do I have a 9-month-old baby here at the house, so I'm going to be up early no matter what. It's like being shot out of a cannon every day, because they've been at work for like many hours before I have even awoken. The first things first is just sort of doing triage and everything that's going on where my input is needed, or reading about what's going on, or needing to also pull up like a news source or multiple news sources to see, well, what's going to happen today? Is the market going to melt down? Are things going to be hot? Was there big news related to something? So it's really, the day starts very early, and it's like drinking coffee and sort of sorting through what's going to go on. But in order to set up my days on a regular basis, like, I'm Gen X, so everybody does this very differently as well as far as your age is concerned. But I organize everything in my calendar as basically invites to myself. If it's not a meeting that I have to attend, I block out time on my calendar and I lay out what I need to accomplish during that time, but then I need to be flexible. So to go back to your point about more tactical versus strategic items, right? I don't think the strategic thought ever stops. And that to me is part of the fun, right? I love thinking about strategy. But tactically speaking, and again, forgive me if this is an American term, but like when you are at the fair or the carnival or something, like what you call playing the whack-a-mole, where you have the hammer and like the moles are popping up out of the little holes and you have to hit them each. That sometimes days can be what we call whack-a-mole. You're just sort of like taking care of a problem or answering something as you go, and they just keep popping up. But if you let that game take over, you'll never be able to get to the big picture stuff that has to be accomplished. So, right, to me, like, I will set up what my day is going to look like, block things out, and then be flexible. But that's because I prefer reprioritizing my day or my week on the fly, right? Because to me, some people will not answer emails for like a day or two because like, well, I just haven't gotten to it yet. And to me, every single thing that crosses my desk or everything that pops into my brain, I reprioritize on the fly, because to me, that's what a startup requires, is that your day could completely change because of one little thing that happened. And if you don't get on top of it, it'll snowball and become a much bigger thing by the end of the day.
Agree, I'm the same. What are some of the biggest trends you have observed in data as a service industry and clickstream? And what do you see as the future of the industry, particularly in the context of privacy and security?
So it's funny, both of these questions are actually one and the same to me, right? Because when I think about clickstream data, which is effectively consumer-generated data, like clickstream is generated by human beings. So when you talk about security and privacy of that type of information and then the use of it, these are the Venn diagram, if you will, are perfect circles. So with that in mind, when you talk about some of the biggest trends over the past several years, and this is really about the founding of Datos, when we thought about clickstream, is we look at it as what is sustainable in perpetuity. That's where we start, because a data business like ours, the first thing that you need to be thinking about is how to ensure that the data is going to flow in perpetuity. Right? Like if people are building product off of your supply, that supply has got to stay on. So in order to do that, we actually take a very conservative approach as it relates to like privacy and security. And the first things first is going through all of your appropriate, as we build our panel, opt-ins and making sure that everything is gathered in an ethical fashion, and we are checking all of those boxes. But probably the number one thing that we have focused on since our founding is we are only playing in the anonymized, de-identified data landscape. Back at the beginning of 2020, our business hypothesis, if you will, maybe an ethos would be a better way to put it, was looking at things and saying that the future of the data business, whether it be clickstream or related or beyond, the real direction, like the big trend change, the sea change, if you will, is going to be around moving from PII-based like targeting and enrichment to anonymized, and just call it like AI or machine learning insight-based type of items, using machines to be able to help you better understand and gather up insights in a neural network fashion, and very, very deep connections between things, which clickstream certainly plays for when you talk about terabytes upon terabytes of data that you could gather and analyze. So that was the first one, right? So which was anonymized, like not getting into the targeted game. And listen, trillions of dollars have been created and still exist on that, but that is on questionable like footing, right? Like how that goes and what that's going to look like. So that is where, when we look at not only where we are today, but again, shooting the puck to where we believe things are going into the future, is continuing to build data products, and then derive data products and outputs that are based off of and deliver 100% anonymized information. So the trend there, beyond just like what I would see from a regulatory perspective or about how we particularly look at it, it's also about companies, like the actual consumers of this data have over the past few years really started to lean into how to be able to extract value value from whether it be clickstream or other types of consumer data without the PII included, right? And I think that trend, it started a little bit when Google was like, we're going to deprecate cookies and like whatever. We get into what happened over the past 4 years with that. But that idea that cookies were going to go away set off like any number of, just call it like actions, if you will, in the broader industry around the globe in order to begin to figure out different ways to go about looking at consumer data and how to be able to extract value. So that's really, it's one thing for everybody to just say, we're totally anonymized, or we're ID free, or it's all contextual, or like whatever it's going to be. It's a whole nother thing to actually be able to implement. So I feel as if that we have reached over the past few years a stage where it is an at-scale implementation of such things, as opposed to just an idea. So that's definitely, you talk about like trends and like what we're seeing. That was a plan for us from the beginning, and I am proud to be able to say that like that is playing out, right, in a way with which that allows for an ethical monetization of data. Because in the end, right, and this is the big thing, privacy and security is important to all of us, right? Like, whether it be myself as an individual, our company, everybody that's out there that uses the internet. But at the same time, we also all exist in a world where the internet and most of the things that we use on the internet are free, right? Like nobody sends you a bill for all of your Google searching, or nobody sends you a bill for like all of those posts that you make on Instagram. But we all have to also understand that there is some degree of give and take there that allows all of that to exist without everybody just cutting checks for everything, right? So figuring out how to be able to exist in that ecosystem, and I say not only individuals, but companies and everybody in between, and that's why I talk of ethical data monetization, that allows for the internet to be able to exist in the way that we all have come to know and love to use it over the past, call it 30-ish years, give or take. So figuring out what that's going to look like on an ongoing basis, going back to your point about trends, TBD, right? But like to be determined. But I do believe that movement in order to be able to have everybody be more comfortable with what's going on, but still not have to suddenly like whip out their credit card just to run some searches on the internet. There is a happy medium to find.
IT outsourcing. I would like to talk about outsourcing. It's a major trend in the tech industry. What are your thoughts on the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing tech functions?
I believe in outsourcing in a variety of ways, right? And I say this because, especially for a small business, not everybody, especially over the past few years, these are not the days of just like everybody raising tens of millions of dollars, right? Because like interest rates were at almost zero around the globe. And then you are effectively being told by your VC or private equity investor, burn this money, right? Like light it on fire for growth purposes, and then there will be more to be had. Is that we all have to do more with less. When I say that from a financial perspective, is that businesses really need to think about not just growth at all costs, but profitability. And costs of personnel and systems is an incredibly important part of that. People are traditionally the biggest cost of any business, at least certainly in any one that I have been in, because they are the most valuable, right? Like simple enough. So what happens is that when I think about outsourcing, or particularly IT outsourcing, the economics of things across the globe allow for any number of opportunities, like advantages for a business to be able to lean into, right? You could absolutely find at scale knowledgeable talent around the globe that may be more in line with your budget than somebody locally would be. I live in New York City. This is one of the most expensive places to exist on the planet, right? Like it's just going out and getting a cup of coffee. I feel like I just light $20 on fire, right? Just to be able to leave the house, let alone what you're paying for everything else. So it is what it is. I love living here. It's worth it. But that is, if I were to build an entire team strictly out of New York City, that would be way more expensive than it would be in order to be able to outsource some different things. So therefore, that is an advantage to like a small business, is being able to go out and afford people to help you build, right, in any number of ways, as opposed to the total cost of ownership that it would be to hire them and payroll taxes and, hire, fire, keep everybody happy, like train, all of these things that you need to do versus is what I would call going out and basically buying a fully baked pie, right? Like that's a way to be able to put it. That's an advantage. A disadvantage is that people that you work with on an IT outsourcing basis are usually not focused on only you. You are not their only concern. right? They have a certain number of hours in a day or a certain number of days in a week or so on and so forth that you are their focus. But you need to spend a lot of time and effort helping maximize that time and efficiently getting what you and they need out of it. Because they don't work for you in the sense that they are not there. They have other concerns. They are not necessarily experts at your product or your business versus others. And if they don't work for you full time and they're not in an office with you or in meetings all day or whatever it's going to be, it can be very difficult to translate, especially as a startup, as a founder, like what's inside of your head into their heads and then start to get what you need out of it. So I think that that's also a fallacy of my own that I would say about like saving money is you need to think about also how much more money and time it's going to cost you in order to ensure that those IT outsourcers or outsourcers of any kind are up to speed and trained and in a position to be able to deliver the output that you need that is going to meet your criteria. So it's not just the dollar amount that you're spending, it's about how much time is going to be needed in order to make sure that they are set up to be successful. So it could go both ways.
How can a company assess whether outsourcing is the right move to their IT needs?
Well, I think the first one, put aside the money for a minute, I am a results-oriented person. Start at the end game of what it is that you need to accomplish, right? Like, if we need to accomplish X, is that possible with IT outsourcing? Is it not possible? Is it halfway possible, right? I think that's really the starting point. So then you say, okay, yes, it is possible. That's the first one. And then you want to start moving your way through, okay, if it is possible, how do we go about finding the right team in order to actually accomplish that goal? Right? And in my experience, you really need to sit down and think about people in your network, because this is the best way. You could go ahead and recruit all day or like Google or something like that. But the best way to figure out if an outsourcing group is going to be able to help is talk to somebody and say, who have you used? Help somebody that you trust. Hopefully at some point you've built up some sort of network or you have investors that have ideas or like whatever it's going to be. And then you really need to start with like a deep dive with let's call it the 3 outsourcers that you're going to actually evaluate, right? Because you may start with the whole world of outsourcing and then you need to be able to focus. So that's another thing is you really need to put in the time on the front end in order to determine, are these people going to be able to deliver on what I need? But probably most importantly, and I think this is something that can get lost in the mix, and this goes back to like that legal point that I made at the beginning. You absolutely need to have very well-defined SLAs, like service level agreements with anybody on an outsourcing basis in order to say like, this will be done in this time frame at this cost. Because if it doesn't, then I am unable to do my business, and then you are unable to continue to move forward on the next thing, and so on and so forth. So clarity, right? Like put it in writing and legally agree, contractually speaking, to what everybody needs to do and when they need to do it. Because otherwise, if it just gets like it could get lost in the mix, right? If you're hoping for interpretation. Because again, you're talking about people that speak different native languages. They have different languages that are second or third. You have, what does nuance look like? What does sarcasm look like? Like all of these things can be very difficult. Like trust me, I have a worldwide team. Like we have figuring out exactly how everybody views things and figuring out how to get all that together can be very difficult. So the more of that you could flesh out in the beginning in order to determine what is the right team for what we need to accomplish and our personnel, the better.
And what if you're not aware of the details, the requirements, some specifics, and you would like to figure it out on the way? Then how can you build an SLA?
Listen, your best way is to be able to start, if you really don't know, start with proof of concepts, right? Like I think that is in our universe, since we in the end ideally are an annual recurring revenue business, like an ARR business, but you got to start out with doing like one thing, maybe 2, right? You sell somebody one thing and you deliver, they'll buy 100 of them. So I think that's also, if you really don't know, you need to be able to negotiate with some of these places like individual projects and use those as stepping stones to be able to get to know each other, to be able to accomplish things. And then you need to analyze and measure what happened and determine if we did this on an ongoing basis. You can't stretch that out forever. Nobody wants to sign deals that are like one at a time. But if you are going to do it that way, then you need to pay more, like per unit, because you're not buying the entirety of the year or a subscription or that type of thing. Businesses are predicated upon like predictability, right? Like that's what everybody wants. So if you do not know and you need to start with proof of concepts, that's fine. And some can be done on a free trial basis or a limited trial basis. But just know and allocate, like, just if somebody's going to do 1 month of work for you, it should cost you more than 1/12 of what 12 months of work would do, right? So just keep that in mind when you are going into it, to be fair to the outsourcing team. But everybody's going to negotiate and however they're going to negotiate. So that is to everybody's business. But that's what I would suggest, right? Like, crawl before you walk, before you run. But make it very clear that that's what you're trying to accomplish. Say, hello, outsourcer, do one project with me because I need to figure out if we're a fit. If I'm a fit for you and you're a fit for me, right? Like, start there if that's possible. And if they're not willing to do that, then maybe they're not the right place, right? Like, that's also possible. So again, figuring out what you need to get out of it and then having that discussion with the other side and seeing if they agree should be able to like sort itself out real quickly if you're on the right track, or somebody's going to be like, you're crazy. That's not happening.
How do you see the role of IT outsourcing evolving in the context of your industry future?
Well, I would say that it goes back to that point about like the industry that I live in, and let's just call it tech in general, right? Because outsourcing of any kind, and whether it be IT or just, other parts of the business, but like if you focus in on IT, it goes back to, again, how much money is being invested into a particular space, and then how can that money be deployed in any number of ways. And again, you go back to like personnel, is the fact of the matter, it's not the sheer amount of money that had been raised and being invested in tech over the past 15 years, that's been squeezed, right? It is what it is, and it's being focused, right? Something.ai. Well, here's $100 million, right? Like, sort of how that goes. So if you're not an AI company, if you will, like a legitimate AI company, or if you weren't a crypto Web3 company for the past few years and so on and so forth, I believe that like it will continue to evolve in a way based off of the economics, right? Because it's just, if you are in, some of the tier 1 economies around the globe where things in cost of living is just very expensive and personnel is very expensive, is that you do need to hire locally in any number of ways, but that's going to cut into what is your ability to hire locally for everything. So I bring it back to the cost perspective, and if you're going to be a global business, it is only to your benefit to be able to interact with employees and outsourcing on a global basis. And it's not just about the money, which is a very important one. Like that's your basic driver. Like, as a startup, are the lights going to stay on? Are we going to pay our bills, right? We have to continue forward. But being more efficient with deploying that capital is important. But you also don't have to give up what is output just by being efficient with it. But you need to do your research. But just figure out, like, again, time zones is actually one of the most important things that I would say, right? Which is, it's funny to say, but you got to figure out like what type of time zones you're straddling and like who you need to talk to when. Because if you need to be talking to this IT outsourcing team at whatever time during your local hours, the closer that you could get together, the better, right? Like, it is, you need to be able to have that people are awake at the right times in the right way. And listen, there are any number of places around the globe that are running 24-hour businesses, so that certainly is doable. But it's like one of those things you might not think about, but it doesn't do you any good to wake up and be like, okay, it's going to be 12 hours before I get a response on that. And vice versa, if they need a response from your team and you're not going to be able to get it to them because you're asleep, right? Like, these are things sometimes get lost in the mix.
Eli, it was a great conversation. Thanks for joining me today. You shared a lot of information. Some of this information was new to me, and I'm sure my auditory find it useful.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to join.
If you enjoy our discussion and want to stay updated on future episodes, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. That way you will not miss out on the latest insights and conversations from the Devico Breakfast Bar. See you in the next episode.